All right, folks, so Apple made some big changes with their Series 10 this year with some larger sizes, a thinner case, their largest Apple Watch display yet, as well as a depth gauge for snorkeling. And being that it's their most capable series watch yet, how does it actually compare to the Ultra 2? And it's kind of interesting because at the core, these are virtually the same watch, where they share like 90% of the same features. Now, that additional 10% of the Ultra could be the deciding factor for you though, but is that actually worth double the price? Maybe a Series 10 could totally fit your needs for half as much. So in this video, I didn't want to just go over the differences between these two, but also what they share in common, just to help you decide which one's going to be right for you. And if you do happen to find the information in this video useful, do me a quick favor, just hit that like button down below. It's a small thing that you can do that'll help this video and the channel out quite a bit, and I appreciate it. So the Series 10 starts out at $399, and then the Ultra 2 starts out at $799. There are a lot of options in between there though for the Series 10, like a different case, as well as cellular or no cellular, but I really want to keep this video focused on what you get for the cheapest Series 10 that you can get versus the cheapest Ultra 2 that you can get. And the similarities may be a little bit surprising, but I'm also going to be doing a follow-up video talking about the titanium Series 10 versus the Ultra 2, because that's kind of a fascinating comparison all on its own, considering those are virtually the same price, but it kind of differs on what you get for the money. All right, so before we get into the differences between these two, let's just do a quick rundown of what these actually have in common. So both of these will provide the best smartwatch experience with an iPhone that you can get, where they have incredibly tight integration with the Apple ecosystem, where these are basically going to be a mirror of your phone in a lot of ways, from texts and calls where you can do basically all the same stuff from the watch itself. There's also Siri, and then there's also neat little features like how Apple Maps will actually mirror the turn notifications from your phone. Both these have their double tap feature. Then of course there's stuff like paying with your watch with Apple Pay, and then you can also extend the functionality with many third-party apps as well. So in terms of smartwatch features, these are basically identical. Now, one difference on the smartwatch side of things that does kind of throw a wrench into this comparison is that the Ultra 2 has cellular built into all the models, where that's an option with the Series 10, where that bumps up the price by $100. But what is kind of nice though about the fact that it's just an option with the Series 10 is that if you don't need that functionality, you don't have to pay for it, where you sort of do with the Ultra 2 with all the models. But when it comes to health features, these are actually identical, where they have really great heart rate sensors. They both have ECG. They all have sleep tracking. There's skin temperature tracking. They both have their new Vitals app for tracking multiple health metrics when you sleep. And they both also come with their new sleep apnea tracking feature that just rolled out with watchOS 11. Oh, and then both also do have blood oxygen saturation tracking if you live outside of the US. But if you purchase your watch in the US, it doesn't have blood oxygen saturation tracking enabled due to some legal disputes just in the US. And then when it comes to sports features, these are again extremely similar, where they track nearly all the same kinds of sports, and that's everything from running to cycling, lots of different gym-based activities. There's outdoor recreation type sports, and then they also do have the same functionality with all their watchOS 11 features, like their new effort rating for workouts, as well as their new training load feature for tracking training load over time. And then both of these also have true offline topo maps. There's also running power that was just introduced a few years ago, and they also pair to external cycling sensors like power meters and speed and cadence sensors. However, there is one big difference with the Ultra 2 though in terms of sports tracking, and that's where it can be used for recreational scuba diving, where the Series 10 doesn't have that functionality. However, the Series 10 does now come with snorkeling capabilities, and we're actually going to be looping back to that in a little bit more detail here in just one second. All right, so that's the bulk of what these have in common, with some kind of minor differences that are kind of thrown in there. But now let's get into the big differences between these two, which are probably going to be what are going to be more of the deciding factors for you. And the first big difference is going to be battery life, where the Series 10 has an advertised battery life of around 18 hours before you have to recharge it, but it can kind of vary depending on how you use it, the settings that you have, as well as how many outdoor activities that you track. But I usually get upwards of around a full day out of it before I have to recharge the Series 10, and that's even with recording about an hour-long outdoor activity per day. But with the Ultra 2, you basically get double the battery life, with an advertised battery life around 36 hours with typical usage. And for me, I usually get around 2 days out of it before I have to recharge it. I basically tend to find Apple's battery life claims to be a little bit conservative, at least with my kind of usage, but again, results may vary. And of course, this definitely can make a difference when you're talking about recharging your watch every day versus every 2 days. But one thing I'd say about this though is that charging your watch every day does make it a routine, where if it's every other day, it's less of a daily habit. And there have been times that I've kind of forgotten to charge my Ultra 2 and wanting to go on a bike ride and discovered it was low on juice. With the Series 10, that's just more of a routine, where I usually place it on the charger when I'm taking a shower in the morning and getting ready for my day. And then after like 30 or 45 minutes, that's usually enough to recharge my watch. Oh, and that's actually another difference with the Series 10, is that it can actually charge faster than the Ultra 2, but the Ultra 2 also does have a larger battery, so that does play a factor in there in terms of charging times. And then battery life also does translate to recording outdoor activities, where the Ultra 2 can last up to 12 hours versus the Series 10 gets around 7 hours in their highest accuracy settings. 7 hours is still certainly long enough for a marathon for most folks, but if you are planning on going for more than a 7-hour long activity, the Ultra 2 is going to be your better bet. But that longer battery life does come at a slight cost though, and that cost is going to be size and weight, where the Ultra 2 is a fairly big watch that only comes in one size with a 49mm case. With the Series 10, that comes in two different sizes with a 46mm case as well as a 42mm case, so you have more options there. But along with that is also thickness, where the Series 10, they actually reduce the thickness from the Series 9, where the Series 10 is now just like 9.7mm thick versus the Ultra 2, which is 14.4mm thick, so quite a big difference there. And then for weight, the Ultra 2 case is 61.5 grams, I think, and the Series 10 46mm case is 36 grams. So again, a pretty big difference there. So for size, that's really all going to be a personal preference thing, of course, but this is where the one size option of the Ultra 2 may be limiting for some of you out there and could be too big depending on your taste. And then weight also definitely should be a consideration, where there is a noticeable difference between these two. And I tend to notice the weight most when doing stuff like mountain biking, where I can definitely feel the watch moving around my wrist a bit more on the Ultra 2 versus the Series 10. And then finally, when it comes to size, I actually do notice that with stuff like long sleeves getting my cup over the watch. But for me, so I have a 185mm circumference wrist, and both the 46mm Series 10 and the Ultra 2 fit me well. But if we're talking about pure comfort, well, I do tend to prefer the Series 10 because it's smaller and lighter and doesn't sit as high off the wrist. But one more thing to consider with comfort is when it comes to sleep. So sleeping with a smaller watch is going to be simply more comfortable, and even more important this year considering the new sleep apnea tracking feature on both of these watches. Oh, and then one kind of random thing I wanted to note about sizes is that you can actually totally interchange the bands from a 46mm Series 10 with the Ultra 2 and vice versa. In fact, I'm using the Alpine loop as well as a titanium Milanese loop on the Series 10, and they work just fine. All right, so next up, let's talk about durability. And this is really going to be a hands down winner for the Ultra 2, where it has a titanium case with a sapphire lens versus the aluminum case and Ion X lens on the base level Series 10. Again, though, for the purpose of this video, I'm focusing on the base level Series 10 and how that compares. But there is also the titanium Series 10 that also does come with a sapphire lens, but that costs pretty much the same as the Ultra 2. Again, follow-up video on that to see if it's actually worth it. But you will certainly get more scratch resistance with the sapphire lens on the Ultra 2 versus the base level Series 10, but there is also a metal bezel surrounding the display on the Ultra 2, which does also help protect it. With the Series 10, the glass that kind of wraps around the edge is going to be more susceptible to damage. And then the Ultra 2 also does have protected buttons, where there's a button guard around the digital dial and side buttons, which not only protects the buttons from damage, but also helps prevent accidental presses. And then the Ultra 2 also does have the action button, but we're going to loop back to that here in just one second after we talk about the displays. So for the displays, so this year with the Series 10, they actually have the largest Apple Watch display yet. Yes, even bigger than the Ultra 2. And when I say larger, yes, it is larger, but it's actually just by around like 3% or so, I think. So it's not like a night and day difference. So I really wouldn't get like too caught up in that. And another thing new with the Series 10 this year is that they also introduced a new wide angle display, where they say that's going to be easier to see at off angles. And again, I do think that's the case, but again, not really sure if that's a night and day difference either. On the flip side though, the Ultra 2 has a display that can get to a max brightness of 3000 nits versus the Series 10, which is 2000 nits. And even though the Ultra 2 is brighter, in reality, the Series 10 display is still plenty bright, even in direct sunlight, and I have no problems with either of these. One difference with the displays though that actually may matter is that the Ultra 2 has a special red watch face mode with certain watch faces, so it'll turn a red color at night using its ambient light sensor. And the goal here with the red color is that it's supposed to be easier on the eyes and less disruptive to sleep cycles. And while we're on the topic of watch faces, so both of these have tons of watch faces to choose from, but the Ultra 2 does have some additional watch faces where they contain more complications, or basically more information on the display at one time. And one more minor little difference with the displays is that you can actually have one extra data field on a workout view on the Ultra 2 versus the Series 10. But being that both of these have basically the same size display now, I'm not really sure why that's different. Another really big difference with the hardware though on the Ultra 2, and also does relate to usability, is going to be the action button. So what this does is that it allows you to perform a quick action like starting a workout, starting and stopping a stopwatch, enabling the flashlight, or triggering a shortcut. And then in addition, they've also added a new way of customizing the action button this year with watchOS 11, where you can medium press the action button to bring up a list of available functions to assign to the action button. But arguably for me, the most useful feature of the action button is going to be their precision start feature. So what happens here is that when you choose a workout profile, you have the option of having this holding screen. And then when you're actually ready to start your workout, you can then press the action button to start. With Series 10, you'll basically tap on the workout profile and then it has this kind of like 3, 2, 1 countdown and then you go. It's definitely a lot different than a lot of other smartwatches or sport watches out there. But in addition to that, with the precision start feature on the Ultra 2, it also has a GPS indicator on the screen, letting you know whether or not you have a satellite fix or not, where you kind of don't really know that with the Series 10. Oh, and then one more thing with the action button is that you can also use the action button along with one of the other 2 buttons on the other side to quickly pause a workout. But the Series 10 also does sort of have this functionality using the digital crown and the side button together. It's just that with the Ultra 2, it's just slightly easier because you can kind of pinch to do this versus this kind of awkward like 2-finger side press thing on the Series 10. But I've mentioned this before, but they could very well have both the precision start feature as well as a GPS indicator feature on the Series 10. Like you can already pause and resume a workout using the crown and the side button together, so that could very well work in the same manner right there. It's just that they do have that tied to the action button, unfortunately. Oh, and then one last thing with the action button is that you can also enable the Ultra 2's built-in siren with that with a long press. So when it comes to sports features, like I was mentioning earlier, these are nearly identical except for one major difference. So both of these can track pretty much any sport under the sun, whether that's running, to cycling, to swimming, both indoors and outdoors. There's tons of outdoor recreation profiles. Both of these can track triathlon. There's basically a huge list to choose from. However, one big change with this Series 10 is that it now has a depth gauge that can be used for snorkeling. So that certainly extends the Series 10 functionality quite a bit. However, the Ultra 2 can be used for recreational scuba diving, and that's a major difference between these two. So if you are a scuba diver, that could be a deciding factor for you here. But another difference when it comes to sports tracking is going to be for GPS for tracking outdoor activities, where although both of these do have built-in satellite chipsets where you don't have to bring your phone with you to collect like speed and distance for your outdoor activities, the Series 10 uses a single frequency chipset versus the Ultra 2, which has a dual band or dual frequency chipset, where it not only can access different satellite systems, but also different satellite frequencies. And the aim with this kind of technology is to deliver better accuracy in challenging environments like around really tall buildings, heavy tree cover, as well as tall canyon walls. And what kind of happens in those situations is that satellite signals can actually bounce off those objects. So having 2 different frequencies allows it to get more accurate results. But this isn't to say that Series 10 is an inaccurate device by any means. It's actually plenty accurate. Like on all these examples, it's basically the same as the Ultra 2, and both of these are super reliable. There's really only 2 situations where you may see a minor difference, and that's going to be in those really challenging environments like around really tall buildings. But the other thing I kind of noticed was around like some really higher speed corners and curves with stuff like cycling, where I noticed the Series 10 wasn't quite as spot on as the Ultra 2. But again, both of these do really well, and I'd use either of these. And then when it comes to heart rate accuracy, so both of these will perform really well. So Apple Watches tend to have some of the best heart rate accuracy out there when it comes to smartwatches. However, the Series 10 may actually have a slight advantage and be a little bit more accurate with some kinds of sports. And the reason for this is going to be simply weight. So larger and heavier watches tend to move around the wrist a little bit more due to their weight, and this can lead to inaccuracies when it comes to these kinds of sensors. And although I found the results are generally the same between these two, the Ultra 2 did have a few occasions where the accuracy wasn't quite as good as the Series 10. I think for most activities, they should perform pretty much the same, but with the activities like, let's say, this gravel ride that I had right here, where it's a little bit rougher terrain, the watch bounced around a little bit more, where the Ultra 2 wasn't quite as accurate as the Series 10. So for sports tracking, the GPS accuracy may be a little bit better on the Ultra 2, but with hardware accuracy, the Series 10 actually may be a little bit better depending on what you do, but I wouldn't necessarily say that either one of those will be a big enough difference to choose one over the other though. I think the biggest differences here when it comes to which one's going to be right for you is going to come down to size, durability, and battery life. So when it comes to durability, the Ultra 2 is going to be a clear winner here with its titanium case and sapphire lens, along with a case that actually protects the edges of the display. So it'll be better if you tend to do a bunch of like, let's say, hiking or mountain biking where there's going to be more risk of damage. It's not like the Series 10 is an incredibly fragile watch or anything like that, but it is a little bit more susceptible with its rounded off edges. And then when it comes to battery life, again, that goes to the Ultra 2, but that also does come at a cost of size and weight. And that kind of brings up the last point, is going to be comfort and wearability. So having worn both a Series watch as well as an Ultra watch back to back for the last few years, I can tell you that a Series watch is going to be more comfortable, and that does definitely make a big difference when it comes to sleep. But I guess there's also one last thing to consider, and that's going to be looks, where the Ultra 2 has a more distinct and rugged look to it, especially with its new satin black color, which is a pretty hot color for sure. But at the same time, the Series 10 does also look great, especially if you pair it with the right kind of band. So there's certainly some differences between these two, but there's actually a lot of similarities as well. And for being half the price of the Ultra 2, the Series 10 can actually still do a lot, but it just may come down to if you're looking for more durability, longer battery life, as well as scuba functionality, where the Ultra 2 may be a better bet at that point. Anyhow, those are just my thoughts on the Series 10 versus the Ultra 2, and if you have anything additional to add to the conversation, definitely drop a comment down in the comment section down below, and if you found the information in this video useful, do me a favor and just hit that like button. Thanks so much for watching, and we will see you in the next video.